Woo! PAX, another PAX. My name is Steve Escalante. I'm the founder and GM of Versus Evil. Thank you for coming to our RPG panel. I'm going to basically sit with these fine folks and let them answer most of the questions and things. But right now, what I'd like to be able to do is introduce our host, Jesse Cox.
Hi. Oh my goodness. Boy, am I excited to be up here. This is going to be an hour of talking about role-playing games. And I'm thrilled to do that with these incredibly talented people up here on the stage with me. So we have got designers and writers and directors and jobs that if I had any talent, I would probably try for. But I don't. I instead play video games for a living. So let's jump into this thing. We're gonna start from down there and just come this way. If you could introduce yourself and sort of talk about what you do.
Sure. My name is Matt Rhodes. I'm the lead designer on Banner Saga 3. So I am responsible for designing all the battles. I also did the battles for Banner Saga 2. So if you hated those, then I'm the person to blame. If you love them, I'm the person to thank and send congratulations to you.
Congratulations, Matt.
Thank you.
I'm Zeb West. I'm the producer for Stoic. Producers have a mysterious job. We're in charge of schedule and scope and budget. So we work with creative groups who speak different languages, technical people, artists, marketing people, all sorts of different groups that all have one deadline. And so we kind of provide continuity for these big old projects.
Hello, I'm Josh Sawyer. I'm the design director at Obsidian, and I'm the game director for Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire. I've been involved in game design for about 19 years now, and I tend to get involved in a lot of stuff. I do a little writing, a lot of system design, and project direction, which is just giving overall creative direction to the projects at our studio.
Hi, my name is Carrie Patel. I'm a writer and narrative designer at Obsidian Entertainment. I wrote for Pillars of Eternity, and I'm narrative co-lead on Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire.
All right.
Yeah, let's go. No, I'm good.
You've already introduced yourself.
I did.
We've heard your story.
Yeah. I'm a publisher.
So for those of you who are curious, when it comes to the panel title, and our lives depend on it, it's the idea that all of these amazing people up here have played and loved and experienced many RPG adventures, and it has brought them to this moment. So we're gonna talk about that. We're gonna talk about what role-playing games means to you, and hopefully eventually what it means to you, and where we've come and from what. So first question right off the bat here, why have RPGs appealed to so many people for so long? What is the secret sauce that makes an RPG so appealing to so many?
So, I mean, I think there's a couple of things. There's a human desire just to tell stories and to participate in storytelling, and I think that goes back, pretty much to the creation of language. So I think the chance to have this participatory role in telling a story is really baked into humanity. I think beyond that, just the chance to be in someone else's skin for a little while and kind of try that on and have that chance to experiment is really liberating, and it gives you a chance to kind of step out of your own world a little bit.
I think also games in general, to varying degrees, are about challenge and play. You've got games where you're trying to beat the boss, defeat enemies, reach the end of a level, and then you've got games where you're just playing, you're exploring, you're creating, you're experimenting, and role-playing games are a really wonderful blend of both. They allow players to create their own characters, to find their own paths through levels, to define their own priorities, and to decide how they want to approach and conquer their challenges. So I think for a lot of people, they're very satisfying, and then they combine these two elements that we oftentimes look for when we're picking up games of any kind, and they blend them together very well.
I'm going to ask a philosophical question of you right now. How would you define a role-playing game?
I wouldn't touch that with a 10-foot pole. 10-foot poles are often found in role-playing games, by the way.
Does it need to have anything? Are there things that need to be in a role-playing game?
You know, it's such a tough question.
That's why I asked it.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, a lot of people, I guess, would say that some form of character progression is pretty key, but I mean, I'm sure you could find an example where that isn't really the case. Usually there's a pretty strong story element, a narrative element, and I guess somewhere in the middle there between those two is probably you'd find something that most RPGs kind of meet that very vague, hand-wavy definition.
Yeah, there tends to be, you know, some kind of speculative fiction genre or a milieu, something that sort of sets this world that you're imagining apart from your own world in a way that sort of stimulates your imagination to sort of enjoy making those creative choices that you make with your character or their behavior within that world.
At least for the role-playing games that I enjoy the most and the ones that I like to make, a key component is the ability to really play a character in the sense of someone with a personality and a stake in the world in the way that you want to, and to have that reflected in how the story progresses. So I think that there are a lot of games that have elements of role-playing games, but for me, the core sort of relationship between the designer trying to make a space in which the player is allowed to participate meaningfully in the story in terms of their own choices, and to have that affect the outcome of where the story goes, I think is, at least for me, that's always been a key component of RPGs.
So RPGs in general, we all know, have evolved from pen and paper, but how did we get to where now, when most people think of role-playing games, they're thinking of something more digital? What was the path through that?
I remember my path. I remember having a really hard time when I was younger playing pen and paper role-playing games with my friends. We would just it would immediately devolve into arguments about the rules, or just some kind of alpha nerd fight that would break out. Someone would be kicked out of the house. Too much soda would be drank for good health of teeth and spirits. I think video games actually provided some structure to that. That was a little easier to grab onto. The rule set is there in the computer science in a lot of games and stuff like that. So I found, to me, it was a little bit of a stepping stone to video game RPGs and then back to pen and paper RPGs, where I could kind of be like, oh, okay, this isn't really fun unless we all participate in the communal event. It's up to everybody to sort of provide their imagination, which can be a vulnerable place. So that was my journey with that.
Yeah, I can kind of compliment it as well. I mean, when we started kind of playing digital games, I think Zork was kind of the first for me, where you're kind of just going through a very much almost like a choose your own adventure, go left, go right, reading the stories and kind of just be exposed to things through writing only, really. But it was also it was kind of an extension of just working with and playing with a DM, which for me was my older brother, who we would kind of set up everything up for D&D. But then it was just the progression basically just kind of kept going as we start getting into some of the more classic games, which I kind of grew up playing with, like the Might and Magic World of Zine or Curse of Azure Bonds and Pool of Radiance and all those fun things, where you start kind of seeing some of the spatial areas and things that you're actually used to visualize yourself, and then realize that this is actually really cool, and it's bringing you into this world, and you're actually able to kind of see the characters and the races and things that back in the day just used to be in dungeon modules and just kind of some roughly sketched characters. So it was that, I think, that digital illustration and the way that they were able to develop worlds visually that really kind of just helped suddenly make some really fantastic spaces that it was just an easy progression from that point forward, at least from my point of view.
I think they were also more approachable to people who weren't already part of like a tabletop role-playing community. Like my family didn't play D&D, and my close friend group didn't really play it either. So I didn't really start playing tabletop until much later. But I always loved computer games, and those were great because I could play them, whenever I wanted on my own time. And so it was much easier for me to get into those and start to appreciate world building and storytelling through that medium.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, computer games have, a couple of features. I don't even want to call them advantages, but, you can play them by yourself, so you don't need a cadre of friends to play with. And they impose a lot of structure. They handle all the rules arbitration, and they set the stage for you. If you don't know, if you're playing role-playing games, or you want to play role-playing games, and no one around knows how to play one, the game is kind of taking care of all that. Here's the world, here's the story. All you need to do is make a character. We'll make sure the rules are handled correctly. We know it's going to be fair. All that stuff is kind of taken care of for you by the game. So that's a real advantage.
So with all that taken into account, thinking back on what role-playing games you've played, both digital and pen and paper, can you give us an example of one of your favorite encounters? Something that really inspired you moving forward.
I mean, I think one of my first was Quest for Glory 4. So I grew up playing this year adventure games, King's Quest, Space Quest, Colonel's Bequest. And at some point, we picked up the Quest for Glory series, started with 4 for whatever reason. And I just remember thinking like, it has the story I know, but wow, I'm creating a character. And there's, not super sophisticated combat, but it is there. I'm making choices when I talk to characters. It's not nearly as branchy as some of the other role-playing games that we're going to talk about today. But that was my first introduction into the idea that you can play a game and it can have story, but it can also immerse you through combat in the game, and it can also let you decide things about your character and the story path they choose.
Not many people know about one of my favorite games, which is from 1992. It's a game called Darklands, and it is a big, weird, buggy RPG set in 15th century Germany. And one of the things I thought was really cool about it is that there was so much of a focus on resolving things through non-combat means. And there was one encounter in particular that I always remember, which was called the Devil's Bridge. And it's part of this old legend where there was a village that was split on either side of a river, and there was a bridge, a stone bridge going through it that no one would walk over. And if you tried to cross the bridge, they'd say, stop, no, this bridge was built through a deal with the devil that he got to keep the soul of the first person to cross the bridge. And so you can be like, well, I'm going across the bridge anyway. And then a demon appears, and you have all these different options for how to deal with the demon. Fighting the demon is very dangerous, but one of my favorite things is that you could argue with the demon in Latin. So speak Latin was a skill in the game. So you could start to argue the legal premises of the contract that was made with the village. And that made the demon extremely angry. And it was stuff like that. Darklands had a lot of really cool stuff like that. Like there was a witch's Sabbath that you could go to, and at each of the parts of the Sabbath, you could interact with the people there in different ways to try to sort of resolve the situation. And I thought it was really cool to see a game like that because I was mostly used to the Gold Box games, which were very heavily combat focused, very D&D style games. So seeing computer role-playing games that really emphasized the more role-playing aspects of it, I mean, that's one of the reasons why in Pillars of Eternity we have scripted interactions that lean much more on non-combat skills. So that always really stuck out for me.
So along those same lines, the original Fallout, and spoilers for Fallout 1, it was one of the first computer games that I played where making a talk-based character was really a viable way to get through the game. And, talking the final administrator, or I don't even remember his name now, at the end of the game and getting him to essentially defeat himself was such an interesting, cool moment that, I hadn't seen in games previously. So, things like that really, it really highlights how creative you can get if you're willing to, let the systems kind of be more interesting than just whacking a guy with a sword.
I can go in a few, but for me, I'll kind of go with actually Pool of Radiance, because it was one of the first kind of games that really also just put you in the room, and you had to really be aware spatially of where your characters were, and almost setting up what is kind of the classic, you know, get your tanks up there and make sure your magic use and everything in the back. And it was just the classic kind of setup that we're all used to now playing with World of Warcraft or whatever. It was kind of interesting. So that it's not necessarily any specific encounter, but it was that first real time where for me, where you were really just kind of organizing your class as opposed to seeing the characters across the bar or whatever that might be. And that really started opening up actually how you would approach these battles, and that was really, really interesting to me. And of course, back in that day, we had to wait for it to come out on the Mac because the Mac graphics were so much better, and it was, you know, you'd wait 6 months before the game basically came out. But for me, that it was just the Pool of Radiance and just the general kind of system that made those encounters interesting from, let's say, previous games, and it really just paved the way for a lot more moving forward.
For me, it was probably a game called King's Bounty, which I played on my Mac Plus, black and white old Mac computer. And I can totally draw a straight line between that game and the Banner Saga. You know, it was the first game where you had like tactical combat that I encountered, where you could kind of like figure out combos with different units that you used. And it had like a narrative structure that you could follow to complete the game. And I just started discussing it with friends and be like, what units are you using? And what combos have you figured out? And stuff like that. And all that stuff just like sort of lit up my imagination. So that was like an aha moment for me.
All right, we're up in the ante, taking it to another level. List, if you will, your favorite RPG video game of all time.
Oh my God.
Your favorite RPG story of all time, and a memorable moment that's not an encounter from an RPG, and why are all of those Final Fantasy VI?
Well done.
There's only one right answer here, but please go.
Oh, geez.
We can take it one at a time. Favorite RPG of all time? Pressure's on.
I'm going to go with the original Fallout. I think in part because it had a really nice blend of tactical combat stuff that I really enjoyed because my background was in D&D, but it also had a very heavy emphasis on other methods of character expression. And I think it was the first game that I had played where you could complete it. Well, I completed it as kind of a goody two-shoes, and then I went online and on a forum, people were like, oh, did you get the evil ending? And I was like, what in the hell are you talking about? And I was like, should I replay the game or should I take my save game, go back to every town and kill every living thing I come across? So I did that. But no, I mean like, and I'm also gonna go with that for my favorite story, not necessarily because I think that it is in itself like incredibly moving or anything, but I always really loved the structure of Fallout story because it allows you a lot of freedom in how you explore the world. It has a very simple and clear objective for you that then unfolds into something else, which is something that we used in Fallout New Vegas and other games as well. So for me, I still go back to that as it has like really my ideal blend of a lot of different elements that I really cherish in CRPGs.
Do you have a memorable moment that's non-combat related? Or verbal combat, as we've discovered today?
I mean, for me, I think the conversation with the master is one of the big ones in there. Yeah, I'm gonna sort of be cheap and ride on your coattails there.
So Fallout would definitely be in my top 5. You know, and it is one of the, I love that it is one of the first games where I felt you could be really transgressive, which I think is one of the cool things just about games in general, but certainly about modern role-playing games, is the chance to kind of explore being a bad guy and in a very safe context. I think
I don't think you were allowed to name your top 5. You have to pick.
I'm not naming my top 5. I'm just
Point of order.
just continuing the conversation here.
Casually peppering
Thank
them
you.
in there.
I think my favorite of all time is actually Shadowrun on the Genesis. It's probably my favorite game of all times. You know, it doesn't have a great story. But it is one of the first open world games that I ever played where I felt like I was directing what was going on. There was a story that was out there for me to discover, but I was really kind of in the driver's seat. I could just take jobs from anyone I wanted. I could just hack any system I wanted. And that sense of freedom and that sense that I was really in control of what was going on, even if it was illusory and kind of repetitive in hindsight, it was super cool at the time. So yeah, it left a real impression on me.
What was your story? What story game did you love? What story touched you? Single tier story.
Single tier story. I have to say that I loved the story in Mass Effect, actually going all the way through to 3. And I played 3 after they patched the ending, and it was maybe not perfect, but significantly better than it was in launch. I felt like the arc of Shepard's character going through that story was super compelling and
Point of order.
and really well
Which Shepard?
Fem Shep.
Okay, thank you. I wanted us to be clear on that. All right, we're good.
No, that's all right.
Yeah. Okay. Who's
I'll
next?
go with, this might actually buck the system a bit, but mainly because it actually kind of also started my career in gaming, but not developing this game. But I'm going to go with Ultima Online, mainly because I just kind of turned into, an online RPG player, and it was that real, just for me, first time where you actually started to see other players in the world and having these big open spaces and people communicating with each other and playing classes and doing stuff online and hearing yourself die and your friend speaker, somewhere else. And I just die, and it was, and of course, just going through all the player griefing and people standing indoors or releasing a Drake in town or something and just wreaking havoc across everything. And that to me was just this stuff that wasn't necessarily by design, making fun of people when they died and just typing ooh, there was just all these things that we would do, and it actually brought in almost some of the classic ideas of playing pen and paper role playing together, where people were acting out roles. So you had your space in the game, but you also then had absolute communication with everybody. So for me, it just opened up this whole new world, which then of course moved into EverQuest and World of Warcraft and all that fun stuff. But I'd probably have to go with Ultima if I was maybe forced to choose. In story, I'm going to bow out a story. I'm going to say Banner Saga 3 or Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire. Was that a copy?
I hear those are great.
So weird.
Best publisher ever. I'm going to say for my favorite RPG, the one that I probably got hooked on the earliest was Shining in the Darkness on the Sega Genesis. Oh, love you guys. And yeah, that game wasn't totally about the story. It was so simple. One town, one dungeon, that just got deeper and deeper, and then the castle that you could visit to sort of see the results of what you had done in the dungeon. The art style really hooked me in. Yeah, that was one of my favorites. Like classic RPG style, where you just one move, at a time in the cardinal directions through a dungeon with clearly reskinned characters. In lower levels, but you didn't care because it was good.
Not even reskinned, recolored.
Yeah. And for story, I always love to tag Shadow of the Colossus for story because the story is delivered like not really in the traditional way, and it leaves through dialogue, through cutscenes, through a lot of reading. It gets delivered in the gameplay, in the atmosphere. And it leaves a lot of space for your own imagination to be like, what is this character and what afflicts him? And why is what I do to these colossi affecting my main character in this way that I don't quite understand? And you have so much time to contemplate the story and sort of piece it together in your own imagination. And I like storytelling that leaves a lot of space like that.
And I'll say, with the caveat that I would probably have different answers if you ask me the same questions in 30 minutes, I'll say perhaps my favorite RPG is Morrowind. I think okay, good. As some of the other folks up here said, so for me that was the first RPG that I played where I just got the sense of this really expansive world And it's also so weird, and I love that about it. I remember seeing some of my friends and their siblings, their older siblings, played at their house before I ever got it, like long before, and I was like, wait, you can steal something or kill someone in this town, and they remember this? Like, they'll hunt you down? You have reputation? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, so wait, there's more than one town? Yeah. I'm like, it's amazing. So I've never actually finished it. I will probably never have enough time in my life to finish it. But I just love all the possibilities there, and just how big it is and how much room it gives you to play around and make whatever kind of character and experience you want. For favorite story, I was also thinking of the Mass Effect trilogy for a lot of the same reasons Matt pointed out. It's a wonderfully personal story for Shepard. It strikes a really awesome balance for an RPG in particular, where your character is installed in the world in a particular way. So they have relationships, they have a role, you're filling a space, but there's also a lot of room for you as the player to define what that role means and how they're going to interact with the people around them. And I think that's really cool, because it gives you stakes, it gives you something that matters, but you still have a lot of room to interpret that. And for my memorable gaming moment, I'm actually going to mention, so I went back not too long ago and started a Renegade replay of Mass Effect, FemShep. And
Good choice.
And so one thing to know is that I tend to play as kind of a goody-goody for a lot of reasons. It feels easier, it feels safer, and also a lot of games reward you more for that. So I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna do the good thing. But I decided, like, no, I'm gonna go back this time, and I'm gonna play a renegade. Like, not necessarily ever, but like, I'm just gonna do that. That's gonna be my character. And it is so liberating. Like, I remember having this wonderful moment of realization partway through where I was like, wow, I'm just going around sassing people, and no one's called me a bitch. No one said I'm bossy. Like, it's clear I don't have a lot of fans in this world, but it's pretty cool. I'm gonna go hang up on the council again. And so I think that was just a really wonderful role-playing moment where I was like, you know, this is what's really fun, is just making a character. I'm not trying to make myself, I'm finding this shell to inhabit vicariously and just enjoying an experience of, you know, trying a different approach in this world.
So with all these great examples of games, and in great stories and FemShep, I just like FemShep. What do you need to do as a developer, as a creator of an RPG right now to make it stand out from this thousands, really, of role-playing games that have existed in the past that are amazing? How today do you make something different and make something that stands out from the pack of the many options people have?
If you figure it out, please let us know. I think you have to maybe dig a little deeper. You know, I think that finding a story that hasn't been told or hasn't been told in the way that you want to tell it, finding ways to make it as personal experience for players as possible. You know, one of the things, I'm going to name drop Banner Saga, sorry guys. One of the things that we've done in Banner Saga is we've tried to make sure that we're really not just giving the player lots of choices, but honoring those choices, you know, that we're not just saying, okay, you made that choice, it didn't really matter. You know, to keep letting players build on those choices, I think makes for a very compelling experience. And, you know, at least the feedback we've gotten is that people don't see that a lot, so it feels fresh to them.
I think a lot of it boils down to good immersion, and I think you can find and build that for players in a lot of different ways. I think some of it is, like Matt said, you know, giving the players interesting choices and responding to the choices players make. It can be reactivity in small ways, to the kind of character you've built, to how you've interacted with people in the world. It's good, deep world building where you've, you know, built something that's unique and that stands out and that also has some sense of internal coherence. It's, you know, writing and delivering awesome characters that feel, you know, meaningful. whether they're, companions or, side quest NPCs or whatever. I think at the end of the day, a lot of players are looking for immersion, and the kind of RPG you're making and, sort of where you're putting your focus is going to determine how you deliver that. But I think those are some of the big parts of immersion.
I always try to find when working on story elements and when developing the sort of factions and people of a world. I have a background in history, so a lot of times I look and try to make the world feel really grounded. I think with fantasy and sci-fi, there are so many fantastic and wonderful elements that are not like our world. But I think something that can help players feel more invested in the world is when you make the world feel grounded, and you make the sort of struggles that people are going through feel like something that you may have seen before, because it will probably feel more genuine. And for me, because so much of what I try to focus on is engaging the player's sense of character, meaning the personality of the character and their sort of moral and ethical compass, I try to find story elements that will really engage the player in that way, that will make them think, like, do I really want to do this, or do I want to do that instead? I think that a very simple sort of good-evil dichotomy is not necessarily that compelling. There are certainly lots of great stories that use good and evil, but I think when you make those choices that the player makes something that is not easy, where there's always going to be some sacrifice that's involved in it, I think the players feel the pressure from that, and they feel a lot more satisfied with sort of the characters that they've made because they're able to express it in that way, and that gets them a lot more into the story and into the game that you've made.
And they feel more real, too. Those
Yes.
choices feel more genuine, too.
Yeah, because I think if you find during those moments, I mean, we look at a lot of games, we get submitted a lot of games, a lot more RPGs than others, and a lot of times we kind of ask ourselves, like, do we care kind of what happened? So there was actually, with Banner Saga 1, there was a very specific moment where I made a very bad choice, and I'm not going to tell the spoiler, but I remember screaming at the Stoic team because I just lost somebody very important. And they're like, well, yeah, you made a decision, right? I'm like, yes, but that was hours ago. And it just shocked my system. But it's those types of things when we're looking at games, whether it's an art style or a setting or those types of things, which I think many teams have proven that you can really have a mixed bag with that and be successful. And so it really kind of boils down to, do I care about what happens? So, like, did we play this game or am I just kind of button mashing and going through and it's not really kind of delivering that experience of, I might lose someone, I might make a bad decision, or the choices that I made didn't necessarily affect anything. So we look at it like, are those going to create the memorable moments that when people walk away, whether it's for a 5-hour experience or 100-hour experience or whatever it might be, that you actually just walk away and have stories, because it's again about almost being able to deliver something where you want to go tell someone what happened. Like, you're playing this game and I'm going to have a geek out moment, and my wife would look at me with cross eyes like, why are you telling me? I don't really care. But I'm just still telling her because it's just these awesome, awesome moments. So we look at that even when we're trying to sign a game from a publishing point of view, is when you're talking to a designer, and obviously you see on paper where they want to go, but did they deliver it even in this vertical slice of that moment of, do I care? Do I care about this character? Do I care if I die? Do I care about the choices that I make? And I think that kind of helps really set up whether it's going to be a good RPG today.
Yeah, I think that agony, just agony, if you can evoke that in a player, it's like the most wonderful thing to see in a
What a
in a
specific-
stream, where they're just playing along, they're doing their streamer thing. Hey guys, so I'm gonna be at PAX next week, gonna come to the booth, and then you get to a choice and they're like, oh really, no, I don't want to lose this guy. Oh man, and like that's what's memorable for you as a player. And I think when you're trying to create those moments or create that game, that story, you're trying to find your way into that agony as well. Like, what would make me feel like, oh man, I'm trying to make the least bad choice here, or I'm trying to do the best I can with the information that I have available, which is like the closest thing we can think of to what leadership is probably like, So that, in that sense, we're role playing as well, in hopes of creating the moment that the player will later role play and enjoy role playing or agonize over.
Just gonna say, you sound like you played a Renegade Shepherd too.
I'm actually curious, can I go off script a little bit? Do you guys think that any of the modern stuff, whether it's Stranger Things or Game of Thrones or any of those things, those more televised experiences are influencing how you're designing games moving forward with RPGs? Because they certainly have the shock factor. They certainly have these greater story elements. Not everyone, I mean, everyone got introduced to Game of Thrones more in the cinema than they did necessarily in the books, unlike myself. So I'm just curious. I don't know. Is that affecting how you develop games in an RPG perspective? Because now mass audiences are being shown story in a much different way. Whether it's Breaking Bad even, I mean, the shock factor is, the ante's high.
I mean, I think there's an understanding that's more widespread that you can have important characters and kill them, and that's okay, and that's something that people can kind of deal with. So I think in that regard, maybe not happily, but deal with, they'll get over it. So I think that sort of is a little bit freeing in terms of, I don't have to have such kid gloves that people are just going to kind of not come with me if I kill a beloved character. But other than that, not so much for me.
Well, then let's talk about the future. With all of the, I don't want a future where all games are agony, but I'm curious where you think we're headed. Where do you think we'll be in 10 or 20 years when it comes to role-playing games? And will it be on a holodeck?
I see two trends that are pretty exciting. One, I think, is the introduction of RPG elements into games that are not like pure RPGs. And that's whether you're talking about something like the Dishonored series or Prey, where you don't necessarily have a ton of dialogue options, but you are making decisions about the nature of your character by the way they approach enemies and the way they explore the world. I think those are very fun games, and that's a very cool way to gamify that personality creation in a way that's, still very fluid and gameplay focused. And even something like Wolfenstein or Soma, where you can make a few key decisions at very specific points and those decisions do affect the outcome of the story and kind of the direction of play, even if, you're not making decisions throughout. The second thing is, I think it's really exciting to see couch co-op and the multiplayer, options kind of come back into, computer RPGs. So, something like Divinity Original Sin 2 and Divinity Original Sin before that. A lot of us a lot of folks here who started by playing tabletop started playing role-playing games in community. And so it's, pretty exciting to see that, you can still have a very large, rich world with a very rich and detailed story and have that be something that you can play with your friend or your spouse or, whoever it may be. So I'm excited to see, what other games, find ways to bring in cooperative and especially local multiplayer.
One of the things that I really like about, it's a blessing and a curse in some ways. Someone said that half of the Steam library that exists right now came into existence since 2016. So there's an incredible number of games being made today, and there's a lot of small studios that are able to make really very awesome games. And one of the things that I feel has kind of held back RPGs in a way is RPG fans tend to be a little on the conservative side when it comes to settings and mechanics. And obviously I'm guilty of perpetuating that. But all you have to do is go down, for example, to like the tabletop area downstairs and take a look at the wide variety of tabletop RPG settings. There's incredible stuff. I mean, there's games like Fiasco, where you're essentially playing out a Coen Brothers movie. There's an amazing array of settings and mechanics that I think tabletop designers are experimenting with, and I think indie developers are experimenting with as well. For me, really the core of an RPG experience is about being able to express a character, and I think there are a lot of different settings and ways that you can do that don't have to be just like Dungeons & Dragons, for example. So I think that the future is going to bring in more young developers who have a lot of really cool ideas about the sorts of worlds we can explore and the sorts of mechanics that we can use to explore them.
I really like escape rooms.
Yeah.
Escape rooms? Huh? Anybody? Okay, good. There's like the solo escape room down there. Have you seen this? I got to check it out later. But I'm interested in the convergence of stuff like that and VR. I feel like VR is still kind of finding like, what am I? It's like, you know, speaking of the future, it's like, it's been from the future for 30 years, VR. It's still from the future. Someday the future will catch up with VR. But I like stuff like that where it's like it's reinvented your perspective on the game. You're now inside of it and looking out. You know, I've heard a lot about like virtual reality designers wanting to reach out to theater makers who have been doing like experiential artistic creations for a long time. You know, there's plays like in New York, there's like Sleep No More, where you go inside this hotel and the world
thing
of
is so
Macbeth.
cool.
Yeah, super cool. You're wearing this crazy carnival mask. Sleep No More in New York. Check it out. But stuff like that, the convergence of that and a digital space, like how do I evoke that same feeling in a digital space? I'm curious to see how that will develop for RPGs in VR.
Yeah, I'm terrible at predicting the future, but I would love to see VR kind of continue to evolve. I feel like it's still not quite ready for prime time as much as I would like it to be. But there's no question, I mean, just the immersiveness of that experience has huge potential, which I think is why people continue to be so excited by it. The other thing I would love to see, you know, one of the things that Divinity 2 did, and I hadn't seen it for a while before that, was the idea of a GM'd experience. And I think that there's a lot of room to kind of keep refining those tools to allow people to kind of tell their own stories and create their own kind of virtual tabletop experiences. I feel like a lot of the friction there is in terms of the amount of pre-planning versus the amount of improvisation you can do. But, you know, that's just a design problem that needs to be solved. And I feel like it probably won't be me, but someone out there should definitely solve that and kind of get it to people, because it's such a compelling experience to play with your friends in that way, in that kind of improvisational way, that I would love to see something like that happen.
Well, that's coming back now. You can see it on Twitch. You can see all of the different tabletop groups appearing, and it actually brings up a great question. Have you ever thought about using one of those tabletop groups or using one of those shows in maybe the characters or something in a game that you are creating?
Amazing question. Funny you should ask,
You're welcome.
because we have something we'd like to show you.
Hey guys, Matthew Mercer here. Was super excited to be part of Pillars of Eternity 1 as the voices of Aloth and Adair, and even more excited to be returning as those two wonderful characters in Pillars of Eternity 2, Deadfire.
Wait. We wanna be in. I wanna.
Yeah, because I wanted to talk to you about that because we kind of want to work on it too.
Yeah, we wanna be.
You guys want to be on Pillars 2?
Pillars 2? Yeah.
Did you say some Pillars of Eternity?
The sequel.
Oh, they're doing it. I would love to be part of that. I'm into that.
All right, we're talking
I
about
don't know.
VO stuff. I want to
Yeah.
be in on that.
Yeah.
Okay, well,
I don't know what's going on, but I want in.
Oh, Pillars 2.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. What?
Why? Oh,
We
I also have vocal experience in games with voice.
well, shit, well, let's see if Ashley's interested.
Yeah, I'll text her right now.
Everyone text her.
She's real
I'm
busy.
going to go ahead and call my friends at Obsidian and see what they think about this.
I'm definitely texting her.
Hey, guys. Hey, yeah, Matt here. Crazy idea. What if the cast of Critical Role was doing voices in Pillars of Eternity 2?
Ashley's in.
Ashley's in? Yeah. Ashley's in too.
You got a response already?
Yeah. She's
Really?
She never answers anyone.
Mine's like polar antlers.
Awesome! Yeah, guys, we're in!
We're all of us.
We're in!
All of us are in the game.
So, the entire cast of Critical Role is excited to announce that we are all in Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire. Yay! So we'll have more announcements coming out soon as time goes on, but we're looking forward to seeing you guys in the Deadfire May 8th.
Woohoo!
All right, I think we have just a little bit of time to open it up to questions from you. So if you want to jump in front of one of those microphones.
Can I go?
Can
Yeah, I mean, can I?
pull it up? Yeah.
Okay, yeah. All right, just wanted to, okay. So first off, no love for Chrono Trigger, really?
Chrono Trigger is a fantastic game. I'll
Yeah.
give you the love for that.
Okay, so my actual question, it has to do more with tabletop role-playing games, if that's okay. So my players really, really love alignment debates. I can't stand them. Can any of you recommend any advice for finding a compromise for something that they love and I really don't want in my games?
Do they align in real life?
Not really, no.
Might be part of the problem.
I think, I don't know, I think it's difficult because I've played a lot of tabletop games where half the group is really into some aspect of the game and half the group is really not. And for something like D&D where alignment is sort of integral to it, it can be very difficult to overcome something like that because it's not like something that only certain characters can engage in. For example, like a crafting mechanic in Ars Magica, only certain characters really have to deal with that, other players can ignore it. I don't know, the way that I try to resolve that stuff is really to talk to players and find like, what do you guys really want to get out of this? Like, what do you enjoy about this aspect of the game? And then try to find a way to get what they want out of it without all the friction that revolves around people just liking, some people liking it and some people not liking it. Because it might be that what they want to get out of it, there might be aspects that other people don't like that they have no problem getting rid of. As long as you can keep the core of what people enjoy about it, then that might be a way that you can find a sort of path through for compromise.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks.
So this is another like tabletop related question, but so I DM a lot of like Cthulhu themed games, and one ongoing debate is Call of Cthulhu versus Trail of Cthulhu, with one of the main differences being in Trail of Cthulhu, you don't have to make investigation rolls, you just automatically find clues if you have the skill. So what I wanted to ask you is whether you think randomness, both in like tabletop RPGs and video game RPGs, is a good thing, or whether you think that it is like a bad thing and you should avoid it.
It's neither of those. It's a tool in the toolbox, and you need to use it when it's appropriate and not use it when it isn't. So if you have something that's critical to the story, and if the players can't do it, they can't continue with the story, leaving it to random chance is probably not a good idea. But, you know, there are places where it's really satisfying to have that element of luck to it, and I think that you don't want to just throw that aside as something that you can't ever use, you know? So it's really a matter of being selective, and especially when you're GMing, you know, feel free to, you know, fake die rolls if you need to make sure something happens if players are expecting those die rolls.
I got a little piggyback on that. I just was reading this book about decision making, and they brought up the concept of procedural justice, which is something that people crave. To feel like when some decision was made, it was just. Everyone got their voice. You know, if you didn't get to have your say, you feel this sense of injustice, and it's procedural justice that you crave. So I think the same thing is true with randomness. If it feels like it was unjust, it might be that someone is craving justice rather than a lack of randomness, if that makes sense.
I have strong opinions on this, but I'll keep it brief. I think, like you said, it's a tool. Randomness can be a tool. I think why you have games like the Gumshoe series, Bubble Gumshoe, all those sort of investigative games, is that when the core sort of conceit of the gameplay revolves around solving mysteries, randomness for getting critical clues can really not feel very good. So I think that when the focus is on investigation, I do think that that sort of Gumshoe style where the clue is found by the person with the highest skill, and really the gameplay or the challenge for the players is to figure out the significance of the clues, I think that can be a really great focus. In a game where investigation is not really key, but it's sort of one of many elements, I think randomness can work perfectly fine. And then within a computer game environment, it really depends, is it a sort of roguelike experience you're going for? Is it something where you can save and reload? Because saving and reloading usually just leads to what is colloquially called save scumming, where people will just reload and try for random chance. So it's a tool, and it really depends on the type of game that you're making.
Thank you.
So one of the things that really kind of brings about, I say, brand loyalty, I guess, and interest with me in games is the world building. Like knowing why Krogans hate Solarians rather than just knowing, oh, they hate them, makes me much more invested in the story. So I've always been very fond of games that have a lot of history even before the character becomes involved. But I've never quite understood really the path to making that sort of the thing you can do. Like with a graphic designer or an animator or a 3D modeler, they can show off their amazing talents in like an amazing 5-minute demo reel, but how does a world builder show off their talents? Do they have to create a novel first? And how do you get someone to read that while some people won't even watch a 5-minute demo reel from other kind of artists?
At Obsidian, anyway, world building is typically done by the writers and narrative designers, so it's not a job in and of itself. It's part of the larger job of storytelling and writing, and obviously the other design disciplines contribute to that as well. So, you know, I would say, what design discipline do you feel is most interesting to you and suits your skill set best, whether it's, you know, systems design, level design, narrative design, and, you know, build yourself a portfolio around that. And I think that will be the way to get, you know, start doing world building at a game studio.
Thank you.
I think another sort of important key element is that it is not enough to establish a compendium and encyclopedia of lore. It's really about how you can give that to players in a way that is easy to digest and learn. And I think writing short stories is a very good way to hone your skills for that, because some of the most talented short story writers that work in fiction are able to communicate really a lot of deep world building very efficiently. And even within the span of only a dozen pages or so, can really give you a strong sense of place and vibe that feels unique and distinctive. And that's a very special talent. I think probably everyone in this room is creative enough that we can imagine very cool worlds. The communication of that in a way that works within the medium is, I think, the really challenging thing. And so I don't know if Carrie has any more sort of ideas on that, but.
No, I think that's a great piece of advice.
Great.
Cool. Thank you very much. That was very nice.
I feel like there are two types of stories that I've really enjoyed in games, and one type is kind of just the ones that you happen upon just by using the systems, kind of how you beat an enemy in Dark Souls, or what order you talk to people in a town in like an RPG like Final Fantasy, or like stuff like that. But then there's the real deliberate stories that are kind of like the actual stories like Final Fantasy Tactics or Deus Ex. Do you kind of think about the balance between those two things when you design for games, and do you like designing one more than the other, and do you feel like maybe those are more appropriate, emphasizing one or the other for certain types of games?
So I think that, yeah, I like both. I mean, that's sort of the cop-out answer, I guess. But, you know, it's awesome to have a really focused kind of narrative that, you know, we've designed and all this other stuff. But if there's not room for discovery and for the player to feel like he or she has agency in that and they're kind of discovering things on their own, then, you know, you run the risk that they really could be reading a book or watching a movie instead. And I think it's those discovered elements, it's those things that emerge, you know, either narratively or systemically out of the game that really kind of help make it a game, and they help kind of bind the whole experience together.
Thank you.
All right, one more question.
Okay, so this stems from the fact that I'm going to be those dweebs that never stop bothering you for Alpha Protocol 2. So do you think that RPGs as a genre can kind of lend themselves to like an 8-hour more experimental like experience? Like, oh, maybe this is a weird genre or setting we've never seen, or a mechanic that we've never seen before? Or do you think it really only works as like a 40-hour experience where you know what works and you're, I don't want to say too afraid to try something really out there, but if something doesn't work for 60 hours, then it's kind of more game-breaking than something that's 4 hours?
I certainly think there's more room for that. I think that's another area where our fan base is they have expectations that RPGs are big. And again, I contribute to the problem. Deadfire is even bigger than Pillars 1. But I do think that there are games like Alpha Protocol that can be much more compact and succinct and really be great very well-paced stories where you have lots of cool decisions and great reactivity to them. And I hope we do see more of them in the future. I don't think there's anything that we can't do within a shorter amount of time. A lot of it is just overcoming sort of the expectation of the audience.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
All right, I await the Alpha Protocol 2 Kickstarter soon. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
All right, well, I just want to thank you all for coming and nerding out with me for a little bit. And this was great. Thank you. And next door in the green room will be a bunch of Penny Arcade pins for those of you who are interested in getting those. So thank you again, and enjoy the rest of PAX.